Hi, this is Joe Rabil. So what we're going to do today is talk about Bitcoin. I want to go through it in multiple time frames. A lot of people looking at this pretty closely. Obviously, it is a risk-on, risk-off indicator for us, and we want to keep an eye on both the shorter-term pattern as well as the longer-term pattern. So I'm going to go through 4 different time frames and show you what I'm seeing. Once we're done with that, we'll go through the S&P and look at all the market conditions for that, some shifts taking place there. We'll look also at the stock requests that came through, and then I've got a few ideas that I'll give you at the end. All right, let's go ahead and get going. Okay, let's start out with the monthly chart of Bitcoin. You can see what's taking place here, and I got to tell you, some of these longer term patterns. This was the original breakout. It was a beautiful signal and made a really strong run. And then we went through this long consolidation. But then notice when this started to lift off, the 18-month started to turn back to the upside. We got another nice move. And then look at this beautiful pullback. It was kind of near the prior high, and it consolidated in a really healthy manner. And we formed show you how this formed a beautiful consolidation pattern where the two lines met up and the MACD was right at the 0 line, ADX was low, and that was a really great signal for the next move to the upside. So monthly has paid some pretty good dividends. We had another pullback here where we came back to the 40. We had a little another 0 line reversal showing strong ADX conditions overall. And now if you notice the way this is played out, it's a little different than these prior 2 pullbacks. These pullbacks here, this was incredibly orderly, right? You know, really orderly little consolidation. This was a little bit more violent, but not too bad. And both of these were pinch plays on the MACD with strong momentum behind it. Now, this time we still have the strong momentum condition because the ADX is high, but notice what's happening to red DI. Red DI is making a higher high for the first time in this move. So this dive to the downside is causing this, I think, red DI to show that there's some sellers here for the first time. And I think, you know, what that means to me is it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to break this moving average. It might rally here and form another bottom here and then turn back up. So I think it's more of an issue of time than anything else, but we do need to watch. If we get more violence to the downside that causes this moving average to flatten out and roll over, then we're looking at something that's going to take a lot more time. The one indication that I'm seeing is the MACD crossing over the signal line. Now, what I usually look for when that happens is, yeah, we could get a rally off this because we have strong momentum in place based on the ADX prior to the move. But we're probably going to come back down, test this area. So the test of this area, the second time around, is going to be the key to see whether this can survive. So that's what I'm looking at it from a longer term standpoint. When we look at the weekly, the one thing that bothers me a little bit is we got this 100K mark right here. This has been a key level, all right? And we kind of broke it in I would say, you know, in a not fun fashion, pretty violently. I would think that that's going to act as resistance on the way back. All right, so we could see a continuation of this little short-term rally that we're seeing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I would tell you that the 100,000 mark, I think, would be important. The 2 moving averages should keep dropping. They could meet up with it a little bit higher than the 100,000 mark, but I think that's the level that I'd be watching for this next move. Now, what's kind of bugging me, and I'm going to just show you what took place here, and I brought this up before. We broke the trend line to the upside. We went back and tested the high. Yeah, we made a marginal new high here at this point, but I still consider that the test of that high. And then we, made a move to the downside, and we're in a bearish trend. We've made lower highs and lower lows. So now what we're doing is we draw the trend line in place, and we're just nowhere near breaking this trend line at this point. Now, what could happen is that this could take another new low, and then we'd accelerate the trend line again, and that'll just continue to increase the odds that we'll eventually break that trend line. We are coming down into the next area of support, so it would not be a surprise to see this try and rally back up to this breakdown level, right? This 100,000 mark, you can see this area is very important. So we could see a little bit of a move here, and the way I would watch that is looking at the 4-hour chart. Because this trades around the clock, we use, instead of an hourly, we'd use a 4-hour. So we've got our trend line break here, and now we've gotten our test here. And it looks like, so this would be the 1 would be breaking the trend line, and then 2 is the test. 3 is coming back up through this prior peak here. So we're right at that level. I don't think it's all that convincing at this point. I'd like to see a little bit stronger move. And then I think my minimum target for this move, I would say, would be coming up into this level. It could easily, because the moving averages on the weekly chart are a little bit higher, it could punch through that in a small way. So from a short-term standpoint, we're starting to see some volume come back in. I could see this pausing a little bit more, but then I'm kind of leaning towards this trying to push a little bit higher before we see any new resistance come into it. So from a short-term standpoint, I kind of favor what's taking place, but I get a little bit more concerned as this moves up to 100, 102 area. All right. If you're enjoying the content, hit that like button and also subscribe. So I'm on the services page of RabilStockResearch.com. At the top, you can see I've got my advanced trend and momentum courses. There's 3 different courses. You can get a discount if you buy them all as a bundle. They are lifetime access now, all right? And also, the individual package has about 3 to 4 reports that come each week, plus a special video for that package. And I also do a once-a-month webinar that is very popular with the subscribers. So you can take a look there. If you're interested in just getting started, you can go up to the top and hit the book. This will give you information on the book. It gets you started on the approach. Okay, let's start out and look at the sentiment on these market conditions. Now, it dropped to 24% more bulls than bears. Now, this was way up in the mid to high 40s and plunged over the last month, and now is getting a little bit of a bounce. So we were at a stage where it was pretty bearish because there were too many bulls out there, and then it dropped very, very quickly. And then when that happens in an uptrend in the market, that's a very good sign. So we've pushed our way back into neutral. We'll have to see which way it goes from here. It's the type of thing where we're seeing this move around a lot more quickly. The sentiment numbers are it's almost like they're following the market action, and so we got to recognize if we get another jump off this 24 level back to the upside into the 40s, then that probably creates some headwind. So it could turn into some kind of a trading range if we see a big jump in this number, something to be on the lookout for. The overbought oversold number is at neutral as well. It's working its way back up. It's at 66%. Now, the volatility currently on the weekly is negative. I'm going to show you all the charts of all of these in a minute. The daily is still rising. The volatility is rising, so that's a negative. The weekly has started to turn. It hasn't quite done it yet. I'm putting that at neutral. And then the trend and the momentum, the trend is strong, or I would say bullish on all 3 time frames, and momentum is positive on the monthly, and neutral for both the weekly and the daily. All right, we'll go through all those. One thing I want to point out, though, is when I look at these conditions, we kind of want a dividing line here. The trend and the momentum are the most important. We want to follow price. That's the most prominent thing that we follow, most important thing we're looking at. Then the momentum of the trend is second to that. And then these at the bottom are secondary indicators. We just want to know what the kind of the backdrop is in terms of the conditions, so that if the trend and the momentum start to get in sync in one direction or the other, we know how important of a move it's going to be. All right, so that's how I use those. Let's go ahead and switch over to the charts now. Okay, first thing we want to do is take a look at the volatility in both time frames, both on the daily chart on the left and the weekly chart on the right. Now, if you notice, we're looking at the average true range. That's this black line. It gyrates a lot, but the trend of it, by using it in 18 MA, we can smooth out that line, and we can watch and see what the direction is. And you can see what's taken place basically right around this October time frame. It started to shift to the upside. It had been down. And that is a positive when it's down, and we were in a pretty decent market while the average true range was falling, which is essentially saying the size of these bars aren't that big, right? They're smaller. And so when we see that, we know we have lower volatility, and that line started to drop. At this point here, we start to see, look at the gyrations. You see the difference in the type of pattern we've got. Instead of an uptrend of higher highs and higher lows, now we've formed this kind of range. Now, it could break out and get going, and we'll probably see this fall and roll over. And if that happens, then we've got a new shift on the daily trend, and maybe this could reemerge to the upside. If it fails here and re-breaks the 18, then I'm assuming we're going to see continuation of this volatility to the upside on the daily trend. Now on the weekly trend, it was rising, but it's been falling here since essentially July. Right around August, it started to turn, and we have pushed higher. Now we're starting to see the average true range rise, but it hasn't moved the moving average yet. The moving average is still falling. So until that changes, until we see a shift in the moving average itself, we still consider it at least neutral, and if the line comes back down clearly below the moving average, we will consider that positive. So just something to watch for. We came down and found support right at the 18-week, and that's really what's causing this to drop right back down. I think if we were to fail here and come back down and show any kind of a violation of this 18-week line, you're going to see this turning to the upside, and we'll have higher risk on both time frames. All right, so that's just something to be on the lookout for. Let's switch over to the 4 time frames. Okay, so we've got the SPY actually in 4 different time frames, with the monthly in the bottom left. And we're going to start there. Weekly in the bottom right, daily in the upper right, and then an hourly in the upper left. Now, last time I discussed this, I was talking about the potential for this to form a pivot high for this month. It was all red. I mean, you can see that it was pretty far down. It was testing the low of the prior month. It did not close below that level, so we did not create a pivot high. That pivot high would have been pretty important because we would have seen the potential for a DI top here with the ADX low not being above 25. We have not seen that happen yet. So we do want to continue to watch for this because the ADX is still down at 23. It hasn't recrossed to a new high, even though price is well above this prior peak, right? So we're comparing this peak here to where we are right now. We've got a divergence in place, but we don't have any confirmation in terms of any kind of a pivot high. So we do want to see that take place before we're calling any kind of divergence. It's possible this could keep drifting to the upside. So just kind of keep that in mind, but certainly something to watch here over the next month. Now, the weekly chart, which has been, I think, the most critical in this whole pattern here, is we came down and we tested this 18-week. Now, it looked like it was going to break it, but it never even closed below it. By the end of the week, it came back. Now, this correction phase did cause the MACD to cross over to the downside, and that is going to create some headwinds here. Even if we can push a little bit higher, it's still acting as a resistance, all right? So we want to recognize that. We also want to recognize that we have absolutely no juice behind this move. There's just no real momentum when you look at it in terms of this ADX indicator. We don't have the buyer showing any real strength from this move. We also don't show any real strength in the sellers either, and you can see the ADX line itself is dropping, showing that it's low trend strength right now. So the odds are we could actually try and make it to a new high and then come back down, but I think we're in for some type of a trading range, kind of like what we were seeing on the daily chart, could actually take place on the weekly, where we show sort of a jagged sideways consolidation pattern as this MACD kind of maybe works off a little bit of this overbought condition above the zero line, right? And then we're waiting for a sign of a breakout here. Either the sellers or the buyers kick in again, and that probably kicks off the next move. So I'm not really into predicting. I'd rather draw trend lines here, or just draw, if we get through this line, if we get this to a new high and we see green DI breakout above this prior peak, then we should be ready for continuation to the upside. All right. If in fact we don't do that, we come up here, maybe even nick a new high, but then reverse back down and break the 18-week, then this MACD signal is going to start to really kick into the downside, and most likely we'll see red DI breakout above this 25 line. So those are I like to frame out the market this way, because right now it's really hard to make any money inside this range. Now you can do it in individual stocks, but I'm talking if you're looking at the S&P trying to make money, it's in a pretty tight range. We're going to have to see some movement on a breakout or a breakdown. All right. So that's the weekly chart. Now the daily is showing some signs of improvement. Now, I like the way this pattern is developing. So you can make a move to the upside and you can pull back, right? And then the other way you can do it is you can make a move to the upside and you can consolidate sideways. That's what's happening here. We're building a little shelf here sideways, which I think is just as good as a pullback, if not better. Now, what I'd like to see in this pattern is the MACD holding both the zero line and the signal line before any type of move to the upside. I mean, obviously it's doing it right now. We're not making any kind of assault, but if we do any kind of a pullback here and test the moving averages, we want to make sure the MACD is holding its signal line on the pullback. The other thing we want to see is green DI holding above red and preferably staying in the area of 25. It can drift down a little bit below, but we don't want to see it drop down too much below that if we're going to turn back up and make a higher high above this prior peak. So we really needed to make some type of a formation where it makes a higher high above here, and price, preferably could dip down a little bit and then turn back to the upside. And then I think we'd have a pretty good formation for continuation to the upside, which I think would certainly make an assault on the prior high and probably make a push up towards that 7,000 area. All right, so that's kind of what I'm watching. You can see one thing on the hourly, we've made this sideways consolidation pattern after making the strong move to the upside. Didn't have a lot of momentum strength behind it, but we also aren't showing any signs of sellers whatsoever. So if this can break out to the upside and show green DI breaking out above 25, I think that would be a pretty good sign that we could see some continuation from this formation. This is the prior high, and I think we could make an assault on, again, I think the 7,000 mark would be the level to be on the lookout for. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to some of the symbol requests. Okay, let's start out with a quick look at the IWM. Notice this higher low that's forming at the prior high. So it's a little too deep to be considered like a cup and handle pattern or anything like that. But I do think it's important that we're seeing a higher low form above the key moving average. The other thing that I'll say is that we are doing it on a relative basis. Since this bottom here, we're seeing relative performance the last 2 weeks. So if this can continue and we can see a little bit of a breakout, I think that would be an encouraging sign. Let's go ahead and start going through some of the symbol requests. We'll start with this Boeing. So I think Boeing is, from a bigger picture standpoint, looking more and more attractive. We've gone through this long sideways consolidation, and if you notice, we had a monster swing to the downside and then a pretty good size swing here, same here, and then they've shrunk. They've started to get smaller. The swings are getting smaller and they're being contained, so we're getting these inside swings develop, and I think this is prepping for something that could be pretty important. I'd like to see this hold this 18-month line. If it can do that, then I think we could be setting the stage for something early next year, looking pretty attractive. Notice we have a low ADX condition on the monthly chart and a low ADX condition on the weekly. So if we can make a strong move to the upside, it could kick things into gear. We need to see strength in the ADX line with green DI to get something going on the weekly chart, and I think that would be pretty meaningful. So don't jump the gun here. There's going to be plenty of upside if this ends up working. All right, PCG. This request came a little bit while back. So now, if you notice what's happened, we're breaking the 18-week here. We weren't actually getting through the zero line on the MACD. It was just a rally back up to that. So I want to point this out. This is making a lower low, and MACD is actually making a higher low. So that's reverse divergence. When you do that in this situation, it increases the probability that we're going to actually break that moving average, okay? The other thing that I didn't like about this is that it was rallying up to the declining 18-month. It hadn't gotten through that yet, all right? So those are the two dominant lines that are going to help control what's going on the shorter-term time frame. And I do think there's support around 15, maybe a little bit lower, but the problem is that it's going to take a little while to get this going. Let's take a quick peek at Apple. So Apple's showing real strength. They won't pull back. What I like is the ADX has kicked into gear on this weekly time frame. We just need to see our pullback to the 18-week line. And I think, that would be a pretty nice setup. But really what I'd be looking for is for a opposing trend pattern to happen on the daily. So we want to see this 18 cross down below the 40, kind of set up in the opposite direction of the weekly, and that would set up our next potential buying opportunity. PLMR. So what bothers me about this is that we had a strong move to the upside, and we had confirmation both MACD and ADX. But then if you look at the way this came back down, it's like a V-shaped top, right? It's kind of like straight up and then straight down. So I'm not a big fan of that when it takes place, and it almost always causes the MACD to cross over. So that means we got a little bit more time of this shuffling sideways before it's going to be ready. I don't think this is quite the signal now. A little too deep below here. I'm just not feeling it. I think it's going to need a little bit more work. Not saying it's not going to eventually be okay based on what's going on here, but this was really strong momentum based on the ADX on the lower time frame. So when that happens, we need to see green kick into gear again, and I wouldn't jump the gun until that happens. All right. Now, let's just run through a couple of symbols that I'm watching kind of closely. This is a utility stock that is trading exceptionally well. Really nice looking pattern, consolidating right at the prior high. I like this tight little formation here with a pinch play and showing signs of green DI kicking in. Look at something like DuPont with this monster breakout that has taken place here recently, and it's holding it. This has been 4 weeks now. We're holding that breakout area. Remember, this was a low ADX condition here, and it did have low ADX here, and now we're starting to get out of here. The volume's starting to kick in. Nice looking pattern. So here's something a little bit different. Coal stock. I've seen a few coal stock that look interesting. So we're up against its prior highs, but notice how we showed strength in, and now we're kind of consolidating back, and we're bleeding back a little bit below this area here. I'm still okay with that as long as this MACD holds, and we're showing good strength in the ADX. So you can really see it on the monthly. We've kind of gotten above resistance here, but we haven't gotten through it on this side. So now we want to see if we can get a trigger. This is the opposing trend pattern I talk about. We get an ABC correction, and now it's all about making a move to the upside, seeing if we can test and turn back like that. We're looking for something along those lines, and I think this could look pretty good if that takes place. One other one I wanted to mention is I mentioned this with some of the autos a few weeks back. Look at this massive base that's forming, and yeah, we had a sharp pullback, but now we've come right back to these highs here. Really good formation based on the monthly and the weekly, and if we can, it needs to punch through 17.5 and stay there, and if it does, that could be the start of a pretty decent move. Thanks for watching today. If you have any stock requests, you can send them to stocktalk@stockcharts.com or just put them in the comment area below. Also, if you want to learn more about some of these techniques, you can go to my YouTube channel. It's Joe Rabil RSR. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.